Hello guys, 38% of shopping spaces in Moscow shopping malls are closed. The Russian Ministry of Agriculture, together with the Ministry of Finance, want to introduce food vouchers for the ordinary Russians who cannot afford buying food. This is how stagflation looks. This is what happens to the Russian economy at the very exact moment. And what was super surprising for me to learn from the Russian media is that they turned out to be very dependent on import. The Kremlin for decades described the Russian Federation as a fully sufficient country that can literally produce anything on their own territory. This myth was first debunked with the Russian aviation, for example, where they literally started cannibalizing aircraft to preserve at least some in the air. And now we see that this is also true about agriculture. Russia described itself as one of the greatest producers of the agriculture, but now we see that import exceeds export. And with sanctions and restrictions, this can create a very dangerous deficit and shortage of many products inside Russia, while other homemade products keep gaining the price because of oil crisis, because of gas crisis, and of course Putin's economic mismanagement, when literally on every attack in Ukraine, destroying our civilian infrastructure, literally bedrooms and kitchens, he spends $1 billion per night. And I'm speaking about $1 billion, not rubles that turned into rubble. So let's discuss what happens right now with the Russian prices, because they tell us a lot about stagflation, but in a very understandable terms. My name is Anna, I'm from Ukraine, I'm in Ukraine, and if you want to see the defeat and demilitarization of Russia that has already started, subscribe and share these videos to spread the truth, because not many people read Russian media, and unfortunately I have to, as a Ukrainian, working on the defeat of our evil neighbor and restoring our borders, we have to know the situation as it is. So let's begin with these tremendous changes in Russia's retail sphere. Their own newspapers, for example, Moscow Times, report about the tremendous closing of companies and shops that sell footwear and clothing. Because people lost their purchasing powers. People do not have money for that. Russians are panicking. We need a separate video about more millions, actually trillions, withdrawn from the deposits, as the population understands Russia is heading to the perfect storm for their banking system. And this is actually so pathetic to watch how millions who describe themselves as fully apolitical now reap the results of this attitude. They describe themselves as apolitical, they did not want to change anything, they did not want to interfere, and now they enjoy the consequences, but somehow they don't enjoy it much. So officially 38% of shopping spaces in the shopping malls of Moscow, the capital of the Russian Federation, had to close in 2025. This leads to the crisis in the production of clothing and footwear, because people literally stopped buying, and for shops it's too expensive to rent. And when you see all these closed shops, first these were companies that went out of Russia because of sanctions, thank you for that, and I always feel very bad when I read that some companies return, observing what Russia does to Ukrainian children, for example, to Ukrainian people. I think it's just not the way to earn your money, but many are closed, and now Russian internal shops are destroyed by this crisis. And it demonstrates us way more than, phrases like inflation, stagflation. That is how it looks for an ordinary person in Russia. But okay, clothes and footwear, people that were living in the Soviet Union know how to have like one pair of trousers for a couple of years. Even after the collapse of the USSR, we were still very poor, and the mentality was very similar. And at school, I had like two sweaters, and I thought that's great that I have two. So sometimes I do feel like I am 2, 3 generators behind people in the countries that experienced democracy after the Second World War for decades already. So, but food prices are way more important than the prices of clothes. And there are troubles with the agricultural production inside Russia, and perhaps this Ministry of Agriculture of the RF will now join to more ministries that Putin is very dissatisfied with. And that is, of course, the Ministry of Defense that failed the Blitzkrieg and keeps failing, and the Ministry of Finance, where the representatives officially speak about the dangers, about the empty budget, about the stagflation, and they can actually fall out of Putin's circle or any window in the office, because somehow the Kremlin decided to live in their own reality and close the eyes on how war in Ukraine destroyed Russia, because it's super expensive. The night before, we had a serious attack on Kyiv with lots of missiles, with lots of drones, with lots of innocent people killed and wounded. And today I saw an apartment building like less than a kilometer away from me that was targeted with a drone. It burned out. But apart from this emotional and human Christian aspect, let's think about the money that he burns on that. Every such attack may cost up to $1 billion for the Kremlin when that budget is empty, when they want to introduce vouchers for food because Russians cannot afford food. What territories are you talking about? What invasions are you talking about? What world dominance are you talking about if you need vouchers for people in your countries to get access to some food? What was also very surprising for me is that Russia is very dependent on the import of agricultural products. And I even had to put it down that in 2025, the import of agricultural products grew in Russia 15%. And actually, import exceeds exports by $3.8 billion. Whenever I say billion, I always say dollars, because a billion of rubles is literally nothing. Literally nothing. That's how they destroy Russia from within at a very, very high pace, And many Russian experts, even ideologists, even supporters of the Ruski Mir idea and the Russian imperial myth start talking about the danger of the civil war inside Russia. So for the first time in history, they actually speak not about something imposed from the West, some dangers coming from NATO, Ukraine, the Baltics, the alliance, but they speak about the situation inside Russia, that it's so bad it can lead to a civil war there. And I have read that toxic article by Putin's administrative and discuss it on Anna Danilchuk channel that I greatly advise you to watch. It will tell you a lot about fears inside the Russian Federation, and we need to know the fears of our enemy. And they are very realistic, by the way. So with constantly rising oil prices, gasoline crisis, problems with agriculture, problems with export and import, Russia's isolation caused by sanctions, we observe tremendous problems with the production of some foods and constantly rising prices. Because you don't need to be an expert in economy, but if the fuel is super expensive and you need to deliver something from point A to point B, the price of that product rises. And Russia, the Russian Federation, I have to correct myself, is an enormously large territory with a great potential to collapse one day. But now they spend a lot of money on the transportation of things. They depend on logistics. They don't have aviation working. They are not self-sufficient. And when they deliver something from one say region to another region, they spend more. And Russian money are losing their value. We observe stagflation, falling GDP, and they now speak openly about that even on the Russian TV. The ruble is losing its value. The salaries of the war criminals who wanted to join the special military operation are losing their attractiveness, and they cannot afford buying things. That's why the retail is in crisis, food prices are soaring, and protests are beginning, because to hide that gap in the budget, to keep targeting Ukrainian kindergartens and kitchens, Putin needs more money and he introduces more taxes. I've spoken about VAT 22 instead of 20%, but what's important and what remains under discussed by many is that he actually changes the threshold for people and businesses who have to pay VAT. And it was like 50 or 60 million rubles turnover, but now it's 10. So this literally destroys smaller agricultural companies, retail companies, clothing, footwear companies. They simply destroy millions of businesses. No, not in Ukraine, in Russia. Thumbs up for that, subscribe to witness more, share these videos to spread the truth. That's the easiest way to demonstrate your solidarity with brave, strong people who protect not just the motherland, but also the international law and order and, values of any adequate human being. And follow me on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Discord, and Anna Danilchuk channel. Remember to join. Check the merch shop. Lots of good items that turn you into ambassadors of Ukraine, and that helps a lot to remind people about our fight. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and sponsors of the channels, and helping me film and work more and thus tell you more from this part of the world that still remains under investigated, under analyzed, and I hate it when people who know nothing about Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, Georgia keep giving their predictions. Subscribe, follow to know the truth and to be prepared to the dissolution of this Frankenstein named the Russian Federation. Love you, united we stand. Slava Ukraini!